Yeah, people care about creating things, but destroying things, that's even more interesting. Ace Pro 24 Chevy over on Reddit made these spectacular looking charts denoting who is in charge of the Formula 1 Destructors World Championship. You thought Alpine had a bad season? Oh, just you wait until you see their repair bill. These prices that Base Pro actually show, they are very much estimates, and some things may cost more, they may cost less, and there are some other things that are not included, like engines, but they are supplied by other people, so we're not going to include those. Let's get started in Bahrain, where it was relatively tame, with Nico Hülkenberg with the front wing change, $125,000. So already, Haas is in the lead of something. Jeddah was also relatively quiet, with McLaren footing the biggest bill. They're now in charge of the Destructors, with Lando getting $130,000 for the damage and $125,000 for Oscar. Most of that damage came from their altercation on the first lap, so otherwise it would have been relatively clean. This is going to be relatively boring to talk about. Well, just you wait, we haven't talked about Australia yet. Yes, the Alpine boys. Oh, together, both of them got over $1.6 million worth of damage. I mean, I'm just gonna list it here because it's quite extensive. So both of these guys had front wing damage, 2 brake drum deflectors, that's that little bit that goes over the tyre, front suspension damage, 3 wheels that were damaged, side pods, rear suspension, rear wing, floor, and both brakes. $847,000 apiece. That's quite a big one. Then Alex Albon followed with over $500,000 worth of damage because he had that foray that he lost 6th place over. Then Yuki Tsunoda had a floor issue, and then Kevin Magnussen $105,000. So yeah, Australia was already quite bad, but you thought it was bad for Alpine. It gets worse with Gasly coming in again. But he didn't actually cause the most damage. It was Nick de Vries, making a big splash of it with $645,000 worth of damage. Pierre had $542,000, Yuki had $460,000, so AlphaTauri, it wasn't a good day for them in Baku. $272,000 from Logan Sargent, Charles Leclerc had a front wing issue, $125,000, as did Kevin Magnussen. Then Max Verstappen enters the fray with a side pod issue because he connected with George Russell, $95,000, and Lance Stroll had a wheel issue, $5,000. Baku actually was the most destructive race out of all of the races that we've seen, and that probably has something to do with the fact that there was a sprint race and it's quite frantic there. Also, Logan Sargent, yeah, that wasn't actually listed in the original chart. I did have to dig through some of the comments, and we've actually managed to update it a little bit from the Baku emissions. Then we get to Miami, and Charles Leclerc, yeah, I was talking about him. He actually features big from Miami, as you will know, causing over $500,000 worth of damage as he span out in qualifying. Then Nico Hülkenberg had $310,000 worth of damage, Lando Norris $225,000, Nick de Vries $125,000, and the same for Logan Sargent and Lewis Hamilton. So we're actually starting to get a little bit of a pattern here, and already the top 3 teams so far after just 5 races, Alpine have $2.23 million worth of damage, and we're only just into the start of the actual season. That's at least 1.5% of their total cost cap. AlphaTauri have $1.5 million, and then Williams are in 3rd, with most of that coming from Alex Albon, so he may be getting a lot of points. He's also giving the repairmen a lot of pain. So then we get to Monaco, and I bet you know who I'm going to talk about here. Sergio Perez enters the fray with actually the biggest repair bill from one sitting throughout the entire season, even more so than the Alpine boys. $1 million. All of that damaged where everybody saw the floor. Yeah, that was quite extensive. And then Alex Albon follows not too far behind with over $700,000 worth of damage. Carlos had $670,000. Lance Stroll had $385,000 because he was just pinging off the walls like it were pinball or something. Lewis Hamilton, $275,000. Lando Norris, $140,000. Nico Hülkenberg, once again being very small but very consistent with $130,000. Then we get to Spain, and Logan Sargent wins with $360,000 worth of damage, and then Fernando Alonso enters the Destructors World Championship, ironically at his home race when he actually damaged his floor and thusly compromised his home race, $225,000 for that one. Valtteri Bottas also had $225,000 worth of damage, and then Hamilton, De Vries, and Norris front wing issues $125,000 apiece. Then we get to Canada, and Carlos isn't that smooth of an operator here. He creates about $692,000 worth of damage here, so it's quite a lot, followed by George Russell because, you know, when he hit the wall and he caused that problem, that's about $380,000. Oscar Piastri, he had that Q3 crash, $197,000, so it looked pretty bad, but it actually didn't cause too much damage. And then Lance Stroll at his home race, $125,000. Oops. And then we get to Austria. Now, track limits were a very big problem here. Everybody was having concerns about actually going over the limits, but in terms of actual damage, it wasn't too bad. That was relatively easy to keep track of, with Yuki Tsunoda only having a front wing issue, $125,000 there. I guess that's one plus in terms of the admin bods over at F1. Then we get to the UK. Both Hülkenberg and Verstappen have to have new front wings, $125,000 apiece. And then Gasly, this is his first entry since Baku, by the way, only $100,000, but he's been keeping it relatively clean, but oh dear. Oh, he's back on form in Hungary, as is, of course, for Ocon. But once again, it's Sergio Perez coming in hot with over $500,000 worth of damage when he had that free practice 1 foray. Esteban Ocon, $425,000 worth of damage. Oscar Piastri, when he was fighting with Checo, he had that floor damage, $225,000 there. $197,000 for Gasly. And then Zhou Guanyu, for the first time, enters the actual chart with $125,000 for the front wing. And the same goes for Tsunoda and Sainz. Now, before I show you the actual charts, here are my actual thoughts from what I've seen based on all the data that Base Pro actually collated. All 20 drivers sustained some kind of damage throughout the entire season. As you can probably recall, it was mostly coming from front wing damage. Maybe the biggest lesson that the teams can actually take is that maybe you should actually make your front wing stronger and therefore reduce your repair bill. Yeah, it might lead to you increasing the weight of those parts, but it might be more beneficial in the long run if you can make them a little bit sturdier, and therefore they're less prone to breaking and you don't have to fork out as much. Pierre Gasly is the most destructive driver of the entire season so far, but I would actually say Sergio Perez is the most flamboyant. Him almost getting as much damage in just 2 instances, Monaco and Hungary, in comparison to Pierre Gasly's relatively pedestrian 4 instances. Zhou Guanyu was indeed the least crash prone, considering he actually had a good game of bowling in Hungary. And Lance Stroll, despite vastly underperforming Fernando Alonso, didn't create that much damage as we would all expected. It was mainly just mediocre performance instead of just crashing into things all the time. And in terms of the rookies, Oscar Piastri is once again the best, even though we all know he is the best based on the actual results that we're seeing. And Logan Sargent isn't too far behind, but Nick De Vries is the most destructive, was the most destructive rookie. I mean, it's still weird to say that, but hey, so far, Daniel Ricciardo, you might be able to say Daniel Ricciardo is actually even better. He hasn't caused any damage so far. As you can see from this chart here, they are the most destructive, and the vast majority of this damage came from when their 2 drivers collided with each other, albeit indirectly and not entirely their own fault. It was just, they just happened to be in the same place at the same time. So it was like a bit, oh, yeah, it was just extremely bad luck, kind of desperation from race starts and restarts. Yeah, it's always frantic at that point, and it's just so happening that Ocon and Gasly are there at the same time. And surprisingly, even though they didn't make too many waves, Ferrari are actually the second most destructive team out there, and mostly that coming from Carlos Sainz. Yes, Carlos Sainz is more consistent than Charles, but he's also more consistently racking up the repair bill. At least Charles doesn't cause too much damage, unless you count Miami. But if he didn't count Miami, he'd be relatively cheap. Oh well, swings and roundabouts, I guess. And Haas, they are indeed saving a lot of money in terms of repair bills this year. Even though I'm a big Mick Schumacher fan, I cannot deny that he did cost the team a lot of money in repair bills. I know that. I will not object to facts because it's quite obvious that he did cost them a lot. But Haas are actually relatively in the clear, even though most of the damage comes from Nico Hülkenberg just clipping his front wing. So yeah, that's something to take into account here. Now, of course, we are mathematically halfway through the Formula 1 season, so I've not included Belgium, but by the end of the season, if Base Pro has actually been keeping up, I will report back to you with a more colourful and entertaining way, whimsical even, about who is the most destructive driver in Formula 1. Hopefully, it might not be Pierre Gasly, but it could be Checo. Ooh, stay tuned, folks.